singing it that it burned into my brain. Now I didn't buy the cassette or the record. I didn't buy the CD. I don't download it on Spotify. Oh, wait. My son says you don't download on Spotify. You just stream it. But I haven't looked it up on Spotify. I just let the song come to me when it comes to me. And it's really special to me now because it's the first time I ever went home. It's the first time I ever went to the Penobscot Indian Reservation, Indian Island, near Old Town, Maine. And that was a very important move for me. Now, there's just a little bit of irony in this whole little journey, because that panel truck that she packed up with all her belongings and all our belongings was actually a Mayflower moving van. Right? There she is. That's my mom. I'm always shocked to think about like my age, even when I was younger, and compare my mom's age when I was certain ages, because my mom's only 19 years older than I am. I mean, so it's not much, but no. Which one is the button to say? Oh, to go back and forth? No, to light up there it is. Oh, you can't see it on the screen. Oh, that's wild. That does me no good. I did too, yeah, but I'm not pointing at the books, but thanks. And then we moved in my grandmother's house when we did this. And you can kind of see my gram in the corner here, this little VW Bug. I remember having my first case of deja vu in this VW Bug too. We spun it out in the winter and a guy was running up the road. And I had seen that exact scene before. Like I said, right? That's deja vu. But here's where I grew up. This is Indian Island. And after a while, my mom got her own house and we moved out of my grandmother's house. And, you know, my mother or my grandmother, they had very loose restrictions on us as kids. They didn't say don't leave the yard. They didn't say don't leave the street. They just said don't go over town. Over town meant crossing the bridge to Old Town. And so we had the whole island to, you know, go romp around and play, and we did. A good friend of mine growing up was a kid named Kirk Francis. He's now our longest serving chief. He was my next door neighbor, and by default means he's your best friend, right? Your next door neighbor or your worst enemy. So we both ran track. This is us on the track team. This is us at the age of 10, mind you. And this is when my journey as a historian began, because it was in that little house right there, down over the hill by the pond, that curiosity got the best of us. And I walked down on there, onto that, knocked on the door to ask the elder inside what that sign was on her house, that spray painted on a piece of white, a piece of plywood, was the word Wounded Knee. And I wanted to know what that meant. And she answered. I knocked on the door. Kirk took off. He took off running. And I asked, she was like, what do you want? Very curtly. And, oh, come in. And it started a relationship with that elder. Just teaching me language, telling me old stories, gossip from the community, whatever it was. I learned it. This was one of the houses, because others, you need to stop by the house. This is how I grew up. I didn't do it at first, then my grandmother found out and then made me. You are going to go. I was 10. There's my grandmother. This is a painting I did a few years ago of my grandmother, and she's very serious in this picture because this is a cribbage tournament, and she was in the finals and she couldn't be bothered. Yeah, Beatrice Phillips, basket maker, but she didn't weave baskets. She just braided sweetgrass. She was legally blind in one eye and completely blind in the other, which was convenient for a kid who always got yelled at for not wearing my hat and mittens. I'd see her coming down the street, and I'd just go to the other side of the street. She wouldn't know who it was. But I went to Old Town High School. I ran track there. And then after high school, I joined the Air Force. And I was stationed in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Anybody ever been to Cheyenne, Wyoming? Alien landscape. It's totally different from here. It's 6,487 feet above sea level, higher than any point by a long shot here in Maine. It's what's called the high plains. Kind of rolling, maybe. But you can see those mountains that are 100 miles away. You can see, the horizon over there 50 miles away. You can see forever in any direction. Here, you can barely see out of your yard. My first wife, which I married when I was in the Air Force, fairly young, 18, she was from there, and she came here and felt claustrophobic. We're hemmed in. So at about 3.5 years, the Air Force asks you if you want to re-enlist. Signed up for 4 years, and at 3.5, they start to say, what are you going to do? At that time, my grandmother was very sick with cancer in the hospital, and I came home, and I had asked her what I should do. Should I re-enlist? Or should I come home? She told me that I had been given a gift. And that was it. No other direction, that I had been given a gift and left it up to me to figure out what that was. I was like 21, 22 maybe. And I couldn't understand what gift she was talking about. The only gift I remembered, I had the distinction of going to high school with my older brother. He was a couple years older than me. I skipped a grade. I never went to kindergarten. I went from Head Start to first grade. He stayed back in the 8th grade, which put us right in high school together. Same homeroom, same everything. Older brother who is the typical, let's pick on the younger brother, older brother. Well, for my 13th birthday, my grandmother decided she was going to get me a pair of Spider-Man underoos. Underoos are these matching t-shirt and underwear sets that are for like 7 or 8 year olds, maybe. And I'm 13. And it wouldn't have mattered that my grandmother, I wasn't mad at her for it. I wasn't mad at anybody really. But my brother was sitting right there next to me, and he would not let this thing go. Because we'd be at school and we'd be standing around talking to friends. We had the same friend group. And they'd look me up and down and say, hey, Spidey. Hey, Spidey. And, so yeah, that's the gift. Actually, later I figured out the gift was my relationship with the elders in the community. And, I had to find a way to get back. And that meant leaving the Air Force. So I drove across the country with all my belongings. And Goodbye Yellow Brick Road did not come on the radio. And then I signed up for school, University of Maine, to study history. And it was there that I learned about, I was taking Native Studies courses. And I learned about the Trail of Tears. The Trail of Tears, the forcible removal of the Cherokee Nation from their homeland to some other place. So I was walking across the campus at the University of Maine. First of all, I had admiration for them. They survived over there. Which I wondered how. How did they know where the best water was to drink? How did they know those particular red berries were good to eat? Over here in their homeland, they had generation upon generation upon generation of knowledge of all of that type of information. Over there, it was starting over. Cheyenne was really in my head when I was thinking about this. Just a totally different place you're unfamiliar with. Then it struck me as I'm walking across the campus of the University of Maine that my tribe has never been forcibly removed from anywhere. Sure, we've been consolidated down to the islands and the river, but we've never been forcibly removed to go anywhere else. That meant this landscape is the same landscape that my ancestors dealt with. That pine trees and its descendant to the pine tree that my ancestor dealt with. Changed the way I looked at the world. Tonight we're going to kind of look at that. See what that means to me. See what a Penobscot sense of place is. I started reading things like Henry David Thoreau. Came to Maine 3 times, 1846, 1853, and 1857. 1853, he came through here. He was on his way back to Bangor. Came from Guilford, went through here, and headed towards Bangor. When he went from Bangor to Greenville, he went through the Valley Avenue, which goes to Guilford, through Garland and Exeter on your way to Bangor. In 1856, he tried to hire a Penobscot guide. He was gone up the Penobscot River, and he stopped off on an island near Lincoln, Maine today, called the Mananoquoc Islands. There were Indian settlements on those islands, and he went out there on those islands, and he tried to hire this old guy that was out there named Louis Neptune. This is 1846. Louis Neptune took Jackson to the top of Katahdin to do the official, it's almost a mile high time, to measure it officially. He was the official guide up there. If you ever heard the story of somebody leaving a bottle of rum on top of Katahdin, it was Lewis and Jackson. So Louis Neptune, Penobscot, agrees to be Thoreau's guide, and Thoreau says, I'll meet you in Mattawamkeag, in 3 days. And I want to go up there and hang out, and I'll see you in 3 days. And so Thoreau goes to Mattawamkeag, goes up to Molunkus, checks it out, comes back. There's an old Indian battleground there. He's looking around at broken arrowheads. And then these lumbermen come in. As he's oiled a piece of paper and he's copying a map. It's called a Greenleaf map, one of Greenleaf's maps of the western Penobscot, west branch of the Penobscot, which he later says was a labyrinth of errors, which I can believe. It's a complicated area, a lot of different lakes, and the river goes through them in a circuitous way. But he sees these lumbermen who are heading up to where he's going, these seasoned, Paul Bunyan types, and he decides to get in with them, and early. So Louis Neptune, arrived to know Thoreau. But he leaves with them, and he figured they would be better in the woods than Lewis. In 53, on the streets of Bangor, he hires Joseph Atian, and then later in 57, Joe Polis. Atien's an interesting character. Probably the most interesting Penobscot historical character, because he embodies a lot of who we are as a people. He was born on Christmas Day in 1829. And we're a very Christian community. A lot of us grew up in the church, in the Catholic church that's in the community. The school, we had nuns. I grew up with nuns. So had that in the, we're one of the earliest continuously operating sites of worship in the country. The site on Indian Island, like top 5 or something. And he dies on the 4th of July, 1870. And we're a very patriotic tribe. I used to say because we hate America there, and people didn't like it. But we don't. I'm very patriotic. I'm a veteran. And he dies a hero in Maine history. On the 4th of July, at a place called Grand Pitch near Millinocket, Maine. This place, the water doesn't even run anymore because they put up a dam and they diverted it to go through the mill and then out into Millinocket Stream. So there's a piece of the river today that just is dry. They might let a little water down it every so often. But where that water goes today, there was a portage. Because if you were paddling up the river, you'd get to Millinocket Stream, which goes due north as the river's going west. And if you went up that, then you'd catch up to the river, and you just have to make a small portage. And you would eliminate this gorge. It's called Grand Pitch Gorge near Millinocket, Maine. It's this little piece of the river. It goes around a mountain. And there would always portage there. When Thoreau did it in 1846, they called it Fowler's Carry. There was a guy, Fowler, lived there, and he had horses, and he'd help you get your stuff over the carry, and you'd be putting it into what's called Quakish Lake. So from Millinocket Stream to Quakish Lake. But on the 4th of July, you can't portage logs. They have to run down the channel. This is before the dam. And so they're running these logs. The last drive for John Ross that year, driving these logs down the river, and they have a skeleton crew. But too many people for that one boat. And the guy who was in the front of the boat, the bow, the most important position, was a rookie. And his name was Prouty, and gained the nickname Dingbat. We're not sure if he got it on that day or not, but he made a mistake. He was unable to get the bateau to point downstream like it should have been before they hit a bunch of rocks, and they got pinned against the rocks, and the water started to tear the boat apart as it swung around off the rocks. Some guys swam to safety. Other guys who couldn't swim, the guys are log drivers, who clung to the boat as they went down over what's called Blue Rock Pitch and then over Grand Pitch. Now, as a canoer, I've always learned that you can run falls, but you gotta portage the pitches because you're not gonna make those. You see something on a map and you're canoeing and it says Indian Rock Pitch, find a path because you're going to need it. And it's there. The path is there somewhere. If it's called a pitch, it's a portage. Well, these guys didn't have much of a choice. The last anyone seen Atian alive, he was standing on the gunnels on that boat, paddling in the water, trying to save those men clinging to the boat. He died. Another Penobscot man died, and a white person died. 3 guys died on that day. They fished his boots out of a place called Shad Pond, which is below. hung it on a pine knot and carved a cross in the tree. And kind of a memorial. And said they never took his boots off that pine knot. Said they're still hanging there till today. I've never gone to look. So a fine kind of memory for someone who was our chief. This was one of our chiefs. Very special chief. His father was a chief for life. His name was John Atian. So chief for life meant you're chief till you die. And then when you die, there's a mourning period. And then there's a group of guys who are eligible in your family that are eligible to become the chief. And sometimes the other chiefs from the other Wabanaki tribes come and pick who that might be. The state intervenes. It's 1850s. State of Maine intervenes and said, oh, that's barbaric what you're doing. The bloodline chief? You guys need an election, democratic election. You need to have people vote for who they want for your chief. People did. Guess who they elected? Same guy who's going to get it anyways. So he has the distinction of being the first elected chief in our history, and technically the last hereditary chief. One and the same. So it's argued, but his epitaph stone in the cemetery, it says, we used to call them governors. Governor of the Penobscot Indians, a position he got from his father. That's hereditary. But he was also elected. Joe Polis is guided in 1857. Polis took Thoreau on his longest journey yet. The first one, he went up to Katahdin by way of Mattawamkeag, through kind of where Millinocket is, same way we do it today, to south of Up A-Ball Trail, if you know. 1853, they went from Bangor to Greenville in the stagecoach. Took the Katahdin, it wasn't called the Katahdin, but the steamboat that goes up the lake, took that with his birch bark canoe on the boat, the length of Moosehead Lake, went across Northeast Cary into the Penobscot, and then went to Pine Stream, and they shot a moose. It's where he shoots his famous moose, and then feels the guilt of the murder of the moose, the eyes of the forest that night. It's a great scene. And then back. That's when he came through here. 1857, Joe Polis, he begins in Bangor, takes the stagecoach again to Greenville. This time they paddle what Thoreau calls an eggshell of a craft, birch bark canoe the length of Moosehead Lake, stopping off at Mount Kineo to stay over the first night, but they did it in 2 days. Yeah. They made men real back then. 13 days to do that. They went into the Penobscot, went across the top of Chisuncook up into Umazuskis, and there you can take what's called the Mud Pond Carry into the Allagash. Into the Allagash, the upper headwaters of the Allagash, down through Telos Cut, down into the East Branch of the Penobscot, all the way down the East Branch of the Penobscot, all the way to Old Town. 13 days. We did it in 2014, exact same trip, took us 16 days. All that time, and then they get near Old Town, and Polis asks, Thoreau asked Polis, well, he writes this, as we drew near to Old Town, I asked Polis if he's not glad to get home again, but there's no relenting to his wildness. And he says, it makes no difference to me where I am. He was always at home. the whole 13 days. That was home to him, that whole journey. I'm sure that Thoreau was talking about the nice house that he picked him up at, that was he was skinning a deer carcass in the flower garden when Thoreau came upon him. There's this really weird conversation that takes place in the Maine woods, because Thoreau is with his cousin Thatcher from Bangor, and Thatcher's come to introduce him to Polis, and because he knew him, and Polis asked Thatcher, "Hey, what happened to it was either his brother or his cousin? You hired him like 2 years ago, and we've never seen him since." There's this weird exchange, and like a mystery, and that was it. It's like it's not not in his journals, not anywhere. I've looked. There's this little weird little, what happened to my cousin? They went all that way, and it was the day that they get back that Polis teaches Thoreau how to paddle the canoe. He wouldn't teach him on the first day because he might want to paddle like some of it. So Thoreau, in the back of the Maine woods, he has all these appendices, and one for birds and one for trees and one for place names, Indian place names, and that's the one that's important to me, and other Indian language stuff. And he writes in his journals, he says, "The Indians stood nearer to wild nature than we. The wildest and the noblest quadrupeds, even the largest freshwater fishes, some of the wildest and noblest birds, and the most fairest flowers have actually receded as we advanced, and we have but the most distant knowledge of them. It was a new light when my guide gave me Indian names for things which I only had scientific ones before. In proportion as I understood the language, I saw them from a new point of view. A dictionary of the Indian language reveals another and a wholly new life to us. It reveals a life within a life." A whole new point of view. When I used to go to that elder's house, it was 10, 11, talked about a birch bark canoe. It's Agweeden. Agweeden is the name. And that just doesn't mean, you know, look at it and it just doesn't deconstruct to a canoe or something that floats. It actually means that which floats lightly. So that feather that floats around Forrest Gump in that movie, as he's sitting on the bench eating chocolates and telling people his story, that's a Gweeden, that feather, that which floats lightly. And this birch bark canoe has that name. So that quality, that lightness is within the name. And they're not like feather light. They weigh about what a regular canoe does today. You got a canoe in your yard, about 18 foot, right? Somewhere around there. Weighs about 80 pounds. These are about the same. They're made out of wood. They're going to have some heft. But floating lightly has more to do with its predecessor, a dugout canoe, a big log that you hollow out, get in that thing, and make your way across the lake. Or I'm sure that went out of fashion really fast. One, the labor it takes to make one, right? Burn out the center and scrape it up. And it's funny because the only way that anthropologists and archaeologists knew that we did dugout canoes, do you know how? Because there wasn't one found until about 7 years ago here in the state. Do you know how they knew? The tools, the stone tools to be able to do it. So place names. Got them all over the state. Passadumkeag, Mattawamkeag, Katahdin, Penobscot, Kennebec, Mississippic. I mean, we could go Sagadahoc. We could just go on and on and on and on. And I'm not going to, be up here just prattling off what all of them mean, because that's not the point of the talk. But I came across this book by Fanny Hardy Ekstrom. Fanny's dad was named Manly. Manly Hardy was really manly. He was this kind of guy. He dealt with fur trappers. He was a woodsman. He lived in Brewer, and he would buy and sell pelts and other, trap here and there and a lot of Penobscot Indian guys would come in the house and, load of pelts and sit down by the fire. We'll share stories. Well, Fanny grew up listening to these stories of the woods and all of these tales coming from these guys coming out of the main woods where they just bagged 30 beaver or whatever, And she gets criticized often by the historic community. Like, oh, that's hearsay. There's no documents supporting any of that. Well, I grew up in a place where oral traditions, that's what we had. And so the stories really mean something to me, being passed down from generation to generation. That's okay with me. I'm all right with that. She wrote this book. She studied all the place names and did all kinds of research. It's kind of cool because she took a word like Passadumkeag, say, and she did all the research. Well, in 1675, somebody came through and wrote it down that it meant this. And in 1721, somebody else came through Passadumkeag. They wrote it a little differently, but they thought it meant this, which might be different from the first one. And then she puts all of the accounts right there on the page, each one. Like, all your research is done for it. You're like, oh. And she's copying a guy named William Ganong from New Brunswick. He also did the same thing. He was studying place names, and he wanted all of them, good, bad, or otherwise. And she leaves it up to the reader to know what it really means. My copy has Penobscot written in it, like the new updated, like our language master went through my book and wrote down loved her for it. But in Fanny's book, and this is a book called Indian Place Names of the Penobscot Valley and the Maine Coast. And in this book, the last paragraph of the introduction of this book, she writes, "The day is past when our Indian names were the butt of foolish laughter, to be distorted, manipulated, displaced by trivial appellations. All Indian place names had a local pertinency. In recovering the meanings and the correct forms of the names, we enlarge our horizon and make home a more romantic place to live in. These old names are the colored curtains which hang beside the windows through which we look back into the beginnings of human living here. For ages upon ages, countless human beings have lived and toiled and suffered here, and we have left only these names." I don't agree with that last part. There's one thing that elder told me. There was always this idea that to understand the culture, you must understand the language. And to understand the language, you must understand the culture. There's this relationship. And I was out at a language conference out in Minnesota. It was funny because there was Lakota speakers there, which was like the Dakota areas, and then Algonquian speakers, which were part of the Algonquian speakers, right? Our language group goes from here into the Maritimes, south to the Delaware, and all the way into the Great Lakes, and then into the Canadian Rockies. That indigenous language group is big that we belong to. Dakotas is different. But we're sitting there eating, and somebody said, Tatanka we use. And I was like, oh, Tatanka, I think I know what that means. I think that's the word for buffalo, like in Dakota. We don't have a word for buffalo because we didn't have buffalo here. So it was Tatanka. I was like, I recognize it from something I had read. Tatanka, and then we use. I knew what we use is. We use is it's meat. It's just like regular meat. That like if you get a deer, you get noke weus, which is deer meat. And so somebody was saying that what we were eating was buffalo meat, which I was fine with. But I was like, oh, that's funny that they're two. They've combined the languages like totally different. Add into two words. But we do that in English too, don't we? Yeah. Spanglish, right? Isn't that a term? Yeah. He talked about, there was a presenter there. He talked about how you can get to a point in the language where you can predict culture. You can like almost read people's minds. It's a neat little trick. You're skeptical. You want to play a little game? Play a little game, all right? I'm going to ask you guys to do a little math. I know it's really warm out. It's not that bad. So I want you to think of a number between 2 and 9. Keep that number to yourself. Now take that number and multiply it by 9. Okay? You all should have a 2-digit number. Didn't matter what number you picked. You should have a 2-digit number. Add those 2 digits together and subtract 5. Okay? Now, for every number, there's a corresponding letter. A1, B2, C3, D4, E5, F6, and all the way to Z26. You figure it out which one you are. And so with that now newfound letter, think of a country that begins with that letter. A country that begins with your letter. Once you find that country, take the last letter of that country and think of an animal. Got your animal? The last letter of that animal, think of a color. You have 3 things: country, animal, and color. And I want a show of hands. I want a show of hands of how many of you have orange kangaroos from Denmark. A good percentage of you. And it always causes people to laugh. It does. Huh? You used 7, right? Doesn't matter what number you use. The math was all a ruse.
Yeah, it kind of equals 9.
Right. You always get, when you multiply by 9, you get 2 digits that when you add them together is going to be 9. Whether it's 18 or 81, 36, 63, all of them. So that's just a ruse to get you to D. But then that's where it's predictable, because I bet most of you have been educated in the American education system, correct? And the first place we go in geography is Europe. When we say country, we look right at Europe. Okay, we got Spain and France, and there's Denmark. I got my D. Okay, we got our D, and then kangaroo, and sometimes I get aqua koalas, but for the most part, that about 90% of everybody. For you in the front row, most of them behind you were up in the air too. But this is the predictability of, so as we start to look at the cultural landscape, the more that you understand the culture and start decoding the language, the more you're understanding the whole overall view. There was a cultural geographer named Yi-Fu Chuan, who was a Chinese cultural geographer. At some point, I stopped becoming a historian, and I started becoming a geographer and a cultural geographer, because it was more interesting to me, because the archives weren't giving me anything. Libraries don't say very little about the true story of my tribe. Whether written about us, very few of that. It's changing though. So I started studying things like Carl Sauer and other cultural geographers and Yifu Tuan. And he really struck me with this. He says that space plus culture equals place. And look, more math, that's a formula, right? And so I looked at this and I was like, oh, okay, so if we have, say, the space, the Penobscot River Valley, so space is like an area. Penobscot River Valley. And then if we look at that space, we add the cultural lens of a Maine, American, Western science, Eurocentric, whatever you want to call our current culture. That's the hardest thing to do, is to identify the culture you're actually in, right? You're like, oh, what's that? But we would look at that Penobscot River as we might talk about the early explorers. You know, that Champlain came up to Bangor and the Penobscot chief, met with him. Or, you know, Weymouth came and kidnapped 5 Penobscots. Or maybe we might talk about the famous log drives and, oh, Bangor, a star on the edge of the night. It was the lumber capital of the world, right? Or, oh, paper mills and dams and pollution, and then river cleanup and dam removals and river restoration. And all of that is still within this kind of culture that we live in today, right? I mean, it's whitewater rafting on the West Branch. That's all a Penobscot River sense of place defined by our modern culture. But it's a formula. What if we plucked out that culture and reinserted? I said inserted one time, and an audience member was like, wouldn't it be reinserted? I was like, I'll use that. So reinserted traditional Penobscot culture there. Then what does that river look like? Right? That's how we spell Katahdin in our language, a written language that was given to us by a linguist in the 1970s. But it's usable. What, the E's wrong? No, the E's fine. It's called a schwa. It's supposed to be upside down like that. And it doesn't have a sound. It's kind of just there. Katahdin. Does anybody know what that means in the language?
Sacred mountain.
No, not sacred, although it is. Yeah, greatest mountain. Does that make sense? Why? Why does that make sense?
Is it the biggest mountain in the watershed?
It's the biggest mountain in the world. I like you did that to me. He threw me a curveball. He says it's the tallest mountain in the watershed. Now, I was ready to stomp on him. As soon as he said, it's the biggest mountain in the state of Maine, I would have went, ha ha! And I would have stomped that we're talking about a state of Maine, a geopolitical frame that didn't exist when they named it. But you're sly. I'm going to keep my eye on you. So often people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's the biggest in Maine. And I'm like, and I was thinking about that. We talked about Louis Neptune taking Jackson to the top and actually measuring it like in 1830 something, right? Until that, nobody really knew how tall it was, or that it was any taller than any other mountain, because it's really all relative. And, you know, just across the border in New Hampshire is Mount Washington, and that is bigger. But how would anybody know if we didn't measure them? I mean, could you, like, say you're an Indian and you're paddling your canoe, or you're hiking through the woods over there in New Hampshire, and yeah, it's a big hill. And then a few days, month later, or whatever, you're going by Katahdin. How could you even compare? You couldn't, right? I mean, that's so. Yeah, being great, I think, has little to do with its size. Has a pretty good prominence. You know what prominence is? It's this certain measurement from the key coal. I don't even know what that is, but I use it to the top. And the key coal is like the base. It's like the lowest part of the mountain that you can still kind of consider the mountain. This is at 980. So technically, if you took the topo line 980, which goes way up into the Allagash, by the way, that's technically the start of Katahdin. And so from 980 to 5280, that's a 4,000 whatever prominence, like this measurement. That's pretty big. Like mountains out in Colorado aren't doing, some of them aren't doing that. So it has what's showing from the south is pretty grand. But is that why it's great? I don't know. All I know is when I took this picture, it felt pretty great. It's one of those places that is magic, that just sings. And I know dozens of places, hundreds of miles away from that mountain, where I know if I come over this next hill and I look over that farmer's barn, just right on a clear day, I can see it for a split second. I know all kinds of them. And I look every time because I want to see it. It's special. They say Gluskop, our cultural hero, when he finished the teachings that he had to give us to live off this land here, he left and he went upriver, and Katahdin became his lodge. Supposedly he's in there today. It's where he lives, and he's fashioning arrowheads for a war that is yet to be fought. Who knows? Things we get from place names. We're very mobile people. Oops, sorry. So a lot of travel. So we see these geologic or geographic descriptions of places. What we have to work with. Oh, you've been over that place? There's boulders everywhere. I mean, if you have a place that looks like that, that's how you're going to describe it even today, right? Sometimes in natural resource based. You know, I live in a pine grove. That's where my house is. Oh, there's a lot of birches up that stream. A lot of hemlock on that island. So you get these different names according to what's there. And sometimes they are rooted in our oral traditions. They're legend based. We lived in what was called the seasonal round. Some say, oh, that nomadic? No, nomadic is like, you know, we're bumping through the woods one day and, oh, a berry bush we eat today. And, you know, but we knew where that berry bush was. We knew when those berries would be ripe. We knew the best way to get there. And we knew in some cases things like blueberries, that if we burned it, we'd get a good crop, a good yield the next year too. So it wasn't just happenstance. We lived, in the summer, we lived on the coast. I've been spending a lot of time on North Haven Island. Mysterious, always been mystery to me. And then did a talk on Vinyl Haven the Wednesday night of the week that I stayed in North Haven. So I went to the other island. And trust me, it's another island. They're really close, and they both have two distinct personalities. One is very blue collar, and it's got working minds, and Vinyl Haven is very much pickup truck and cowboy boot place, where North Haven is a little more prim and proper. But with a rustic marine culture edge to it. You know, the docks are, Foy Brown is weathered old guy that was fun to talk to. But it's not about either one of those islands. Because for me, Vinyl Haven and then North Haven sits like a hat on top of it. Historically, they were called the Fox Islands. I think Martin Pring named them the Fox Islands. And it isn't about the islands themselves at all. It's that space in between the islands. It's a place called the Fox Island Thoroughfare. It's this gut of water, got a bunch of coves and a bunch of what they call cubby holes, little, at low tide they turn to mud on both sides. And what is there today is shell midden, shell midden, shell midden. It's just ringed with shell middens all over the place. Shell middens equals occupation. It means indigenous people were there eating shellfish and then throwing their shells over there. And they pile up year after year, decade after decade, century after century. They're throwing their clams there in what they call now middens or shell heaps. Now, back in the day, back in the indigenous day, if I had a pair of buckskin trousers, had a pair of pants that were made out of deer skin, say the dog chewed them all up. And my mother says, relax, I'll make you a new pair. Just shot a deer, we'll get the hide ready and we'll make you a new pair of pants. Throw those away. If I would have thrown those away in the dirt, what would happen to them? They're made out of deer skin. They would just disintegrate into the soil, never to be seen again, right? But what if I throw them in the shell heap? The shell's got calcium carbonate in them. The organic material does not deteriorate. It just sits there. That's what the anthropologists are looking at. They're digging down through 1,000 years later and find my buckskin trousers. They, oh, Dr. Sims, look at this. They made pants out of deer skin. Yeah, it's deer skin, all right. And look, canine chew marks. They had dogs. So they can find out from our trash these little bits of information about our culture from way back, from those shell heaps. But there's plenty of food in the form of hunting and also the shellfish, especially the shellfish in the summertime on the coast. And it's just not this one place. They're all over the place. But this one place is very abundant. And it's wonderful there. If you've ever been to North Haven or Vinyl Haven, that space in between is like magic. It's calm. The seas between there and Rockland, in the Penobscot language, and what they're called, choppy seas. That's the name of them, the choppy seas. But moving into fall, we got to do something. Because the carrying capacity of the land isn't going to be able to sustain us all living in the same area. It's not going to be enough deer. It's not going to be enough rabbits to snare. There's certainly not going to be enough, whatever else, nuts, berries that we're going to harvest. So what we did was we got into our family groups, kinship bands, and we're going to head up river. Going to paddle up to the river, get in our river, and these are our kinship bands, these animals, these little silhouettes, the turtle clan, the water nymph, the sturgeon, the crow, the raccoon, the eel, the sculpin. All of these animals all represent the family. And this map that you see over here to the left, this was done by Frank Speck, an anthropologist, showing the hunting territories of these particular families. Now, remember, we were down in Penobscot Bay in the summertime. Some of these folks are going up into Madawaska for the winter or in the fall to get to their hunting territory, because that's the place they hunted all the time. And those men were teaching those boys where to hunt here their whole lives. And those women were teaching those girls where the best berries and the best nuts were. So the families would return to the same spot year after year, even if it meant, I'll tell you, those Solomon boys, though they're the ones, the family, Solomon family is the one that went at that up there. I bet you they were great paddlers and polers. They had done, you do it every year. Spread out. And you better save enough, because there's a moon towards the end of winter that we call the moon that provides a little food grudgingly. This is starving times. Better save some food up. And winter was the time to tell stories. One family that stayed down in the Bay Area, and that was the family of the lobster and the crabs. Good friend of mine is, and this is a Mitchell family. So we have two different Mitchell families. We have the Bear Mitchells, and we have the Daylight Mitchells. Daylight Mitchells are the old school Mitchells. They are the original family. And I think we talk about them tonight, but I'm not sure. We'll get back to them. So this is where I live. This is Indian Island. This piece of land at the bottom, just for reference, is also an island. This part over here connects to that eventually, creating an island. As an undergrad, I started drawing a map and doing my own research and putting these written text onto maps and saying, okay, this is where she's talking about. And there was this word called Buck something or other that was talking about Orono Island and this channel to what we call Piggity Ridge to there. You know what Piggity Ridge, it makes me laugh every time I say it. You know what Piggity Ridge means? It's a ridge, but we call it Piggity Ridge. A Piggity is a fart. It's just a regular old fart. And it was my aunt passed away, my mother's oldest sister. And my cousin Kelly, who had just lost her husband and then she loses her mother, she's asked me to come over because I'm kind of techie, and she wants to get all the pictures of her mom, make sure we got them all, because we're doing a slideshow, which I do for my community. Whenever someone passes away, I put together a slideshow for the community. And so I'm helping her get the photos. And I see these photos, and do you know how sometimes you can like take a picture on your cell phone now and it will take this 1 second video? You ever done that? You see, it's annoying to me. But this 1 second video happens along with the picture. And so I see this. I see these paired up numbers. They're the same. So I click on one. And it's my aunt had this sense of humor that instead of saying cheese, she'd say piggity, and then she started laughing. And so every picture of her laughing, essentially. And so every one of these videos, and there was like 6 or 7 of them, piggity, piggity, and it means fart. So I mean, and then my cousin got laughing, her daughter, and then got crying because we were doing this. But it was really cathartic. But between Piggity Ridge and here, this piece of river had this really long name. And I asked Dr. Carol Dana, she's our linguist in our community, tribal member. I asked her, hey, what's up with this word? And she's like, oh, it's that word from that song. We have a song called Tutu Was. And there's a song it's called the Pine Needle Dance. And what we used to do is take pine needles and some little gum from the tree and hold the pine needles together to make a little tripod out of these pine needles. And we put them on a board, and we'd hit the board. You'd drum on the board. Boom, boom, boom. And these would bounce around, these pine needles. And there are phrases in the song that the guy singing it are watching the pine needles, and if the pine needles fall down, there's a command for that. He sings it out, and all the women fall down. So they're listening to him, kind of like a square dance type of thing, but Indian style. And one of them is to turn and spin. And that's what she's saying. That's that command to turn and spin in that song. And I was like, well, whatever. I wrote it down, not knowing where it was going to take me. But my uncle lived on Orson Island. This is what we see as Big Bog Island here. He lived up here. And he lived in a place that house, he built that house. You see it's on like a granite pier. That's because this red line that you see going over the map used to be the old BZ Railroad, or the Bangor and Piscataquis Railroad, like the second oldest railroad in this country. And it went right across the island. And he smartly used where the bridge used to land as a place to build this out, the foundation of his house. Still there. It's my camp today. It's nice. It's beautiful. And he used to cross that piece of river every day because he'd come down the railroad grade. He'd go over to this airport and he'd call my mother. And my parents owned a cafe and gift shop on the reservation. He'd come there to drink coffee and harass people with all his stories. And he looked at me and he said, he saw what I'd written down about that. He goes, that makes perfect sense. It's like, how? And he begins to tell me that this piece of river, when it's flooded, when the water's really high, it flows this way to the west. And when it's normal, it flows that way. And I went and did research and figured out before they put the dam in, which is here, there used to be a set of reversing falls there, falls that would flow to the right as we're looking at it here most of the year, but in the spring, it'd flow to the left. The place that the water turned back upon itself or turned and spun. Same root words are there that confuse Carol. But this really points out the need for understanding like field work, like to be there, to really get a sense of that place. You got to kind of be there.
I think your mic cut out. I gotta switch you out. Thanks.
Testing. Big Bog Island. So I'm there all the time. Got a beautiful camp. I'm on that island. I've explored every inch of it. And there's a little bog on that island, but not a Kachee Mugawug Menahan. That's how you say Big Bog Island in Penobscot. Kachee Mugawug Menahan. And it's not just big, it's like immense. Kachee is like, we have a word called Kachinawez, which is the Great Spirit. And this is Kachee Mugawug, which is really big, grand bog. Not there, not on that island. Hunted it, understand why for many years, what's going on. The swamp on there, but I know the difference between a bog and a swamp. It's a different word in Penobscot for both places. It's not the same thing. And I was looking at a map one day, and you see where Birch Stream is, and as it comes at the top of this island. And I'll show you a map and show you what this looks like. So Birch Stream is way up here, comes that way. Right at the top of this island. And 26, Kachee Mugawug Menahan is the island we're talking about. We're talking about this island right here. Water comes down this way, flows this way, and then back down, creating this island. Birch Stream, you take that, you don't get very far before the trees just fall away and you're in the third biggest bog in the state of Maine. You guys rode through it many times. If you took 95, just before you get to Old Town, do you know that big Elton Bog? That's the third biggest bog in the state of Maine. Now, if you're paddling the river, you have no idea that's there. So, this island, Kachee Mugawug Menahan, becomes this big road sign to this immense hunting territory. We got to think differently about the landscape. It's told that everything has an upriver perspective. Paddling upriver makes more sense. Penobscot at the sloping ledge, you see that sloping ledge coming upriver. Stillwater is one of those confusing things because at the mouth of the Stillwater is this massive waterfall. Like, man, it's called Stillwater. It's called Stillwater in our language, too. It's a tragic story why we call it Stillwater today. So here's what we're talking about. We just talked about Orson Island at the top. We talked about this channel that turns back upon itself because the water can go this way, meet back up. This is Marsh Island. University of Maine is on this island, stole by John Marsh at some time. He was supposed to go to Boston to get something signed to lease the island, but he changed paperwork and he said, oh, I just bought this island. So he takes the island, but then in a treaty of 1818 with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, there's a treaty that defines what lands we have retained for our reservation, which is all the islands in the Penobscot River from Old Town Island to Nicketow Island. Now, both ends of this, Nicketow is at the fork. It's at Medway. Medway, Nicketow means at the fork. There's an island right there between the East Branch and the West Branch. And at both ends of this agreement, Nicketow Island's been under contest for so long. Is it part of the reservation or is it not? And at the southern end, which one of these islands is Old Town Island? So the state of Maine says, well, it's obviously Indian Island. Marsh Island, the actual town that the town of Old Town is on, Marsh Island, that can't be it because, boy, there's, that's a big island and we want it. So there were some legal actions that started to be talked about. And so the state of Maine just said, well, beginning at Pushaw Stream, which comes in from over here, so from here down, why don't we just rename that the Stillwater River? And then Marsh Island ceases to be an island, which says in the Penobscot River. We'll take it off the table. Argument done. Lucky they did that because University of Maine's on that island. There's an airport on that island. There's parts of 2 towns on that island. There's a paper mill on that island. It's a pretty productive island. And when they removed dams, they removed them all from the main stem there. And then this Stillwater is actually the one producing all the power now, all the electrical power, because they removed dams off the main stem. All the electrical power is coming from the Stillwater branch. So what happened here historically or culturally? What's going on in this space? Well, why did we call it the Stillwater? That's the thing. They named it in English the same word that we called it. Said, oh, they called it the Stillwater Road. Let's just rename it. So what's going on in this place? So first of all, as you're approaching this set of falls, air falls, or if you see it in quotes, it means that's what it means in the language, airwise fishery below outlet. Oftentimes you're going to see falls like this after a major outlet because the river's dumping stuff into the river. And the tributary coming in is dumping stuff in the river, rocks, and it's going to create falls eventually. But so there's a great set of falls here. And when you're here, you could see them, you can hear them, and you can feel them. The current's really strong. And there's a place name there that's called where the river forms a channel. So it's pointing to this channel that makes this island, this Anthill Island channel here. So it's telling you to go this way. And when you go this way, there's a portage. Pat's Pizza is like right here. You know where that is in Orono. But there was a carrying place there. You'd carry, and by doing so, you've just jumped 2 set of falls. Completely missed both of them. Kind of 3 because there's this little set here. Right? And now you're in the Stillwater, because the rest of that journey up that channel, let's go this way. Oh no. So the rest of this journey up this one, Stillwater, is one portage here. In our language, it means where there's an easy portage. All you do is, it's a set of falls on either side of a big rock island, and you just pull up to the bottom of that rock and go to the top of it, and you're above the falls, and just keep going. And you get all the way up. You can go up through, twisty turny place. And there's a set of falls here in Old Town. There's 3 sets. So if you were to go this way, you were to go up the main stem, you'd have to get up over where Basin Mills is here. There's a place called Slippery Ledge Falls. The island was called Slippery Ledge in the language. Slippery Ledge Falls. And then here at Great Works was Bad Falls at the site of a bad carry. That's what it meant in the language. Bad Falls at the site of a bad carry. So even it was hard to get around. Not to mention the falls that are on either side of this island, and then the major falls that we get the word Penobscot from above this island here. All of those obstacles on this main stem, and barely any going this way, the flat waterway. All of this from understanding what we named each one of those places. This is what my ancestors left on maps. This is what they told guides. This is what they told Treat in 1820. This is what they told Thoreau. And we gain a picture of what's going on in the river and how we used it. Passadumkeag means above the gravel bar. Keg is a locative. You see that on a lot of words. It just means at the place of. So we're saying at the place that's above the gravel bar. And the Passadumkeag stream is what we're talking about. Not the town, we're talking about the stream. And the stream is going through a glacial landscape with moraines and eskers, and it's carrying sand and gravel. And the stream has a smaller cross section and can actually carry more material. As soon as it hit the river, it falls out because the water isn't as powerful because it's spread out, and it drops down and starts creating this gravel bar. And it's huge. It comes way down river. This is here's the stream, and it's still remnants of it down here. So a couple miles, this gravel bar. And it's very distinctive. You know it when you're there. You're like, oh, this is the gravel bar. So I'm going to there's a stream above this that'll take me to the Machias River. Right? Passadumkeag could do that. But also, gravel bar, culturally speaking, is a great place to make a fish weir. It's a place we can get fish. We can take sticks and stones and push it into the gravel, and boy, we can dam up the river almost, let the fish go by in just certain passages. In 1820, when John Neptune was with Treat, they saw this one. It's called Okwagees, number 5. It's a zigzag patterned weir in the river for people catching fish. This one down here is called Sugar Island. This is where I was today. We have clients on this island called Sugar Island. It actually means Sugar Plum Island. And the sugar plum they're talking about is the fruit of the service berry bush. Familiar with service berry bush? What else is it called? What's it called? You know it. Yeah, shad bush. It's called shad bush. And what's great about this service berry bush is that in early spring, like before anything starts to bloom and the forest is still dull and gray and all winter kissed, right? The serviceberry bush starts to bloom early. It's like the first thing. These white flowers show up. Whole bush full of white flowers. And you know when that's in bloom that food is coming, the shad are coming. especially at a time when they just finished that moon that provides a little food grudgingly. And here you have this plant that acts like a beacon that telling you that fish are coming, especially when you're here, right? And it was on this western edge that those are. They're still there, these trees, when you want to get up here to get ready for fishing. It's like a beacon telling us information, nature. Oh, number 9. Well, Wabi Men Manitou, Wabi Manitou Menahan. Means White Devil Island. White Devil Island. Confuses me. Really confuses me because I can't figure out White Devil Island. How my ancestors knew who Janet Mills was so long ago. Sorry, Janet. Insert bad politician of the day. I did it to John Baldacci once, and he was in the room. And he came up to me after. He says, "Yeah, you got me." So this is actually our language in the landscape. An early map that I've done. On Sugar Island, we do a cultural tourism program. That's why people are there today. They're leaving in the morning to paddle to Indian Island 10 miles. They're leaving at 4 o'clock. They're choosing. They didn't have to. We want to get up at 4 o'clock and head out to get there before it gets too hot. So they're going to paddle 10 miles tomorrow. But this is our cultural tourism logo. So it shows a white tree because we're on that island. And the shad. See the shad in the river? Yeah. You remember my brother, Jojo? You know what he said about this? He said, it looks like the Death Star. Do you see that? With the circle and the... I was like, yeah, you know what? It's not the Death Star. Well, he was coming up on my car, and I have it on my car, and from a distance, it looked like the Death Star as he came up to it. Star Wars reference. So fishing by spears, weirs, and nets. Oh, my finger was touching the pad. Blackman Stream, which is just above those falls that we were talking about. We're back near the Stillwater. This means plenty of alewives stream. And we have a Madamasconis on the map today, if you've ever seen it off the interstates, near Lincoln. And that stream is the same thing, means the same thing. So we had 2 of them that meant the same thing on the same river. They're not exclusive. That the fact that there was plenty of alewives in both of them was important enough for that's what the name it got. Portaging is important for 2 reasons. You got to get around those pitches sometimes, but also it's like the river system is like a tree, and the next river system is like another tree, and the branches never touch. And a portage is like a squirrel jumping from one branch to the other, connecting a whole other river system. One of the most largest is the Cook to Cook, the Sowadabscook to the Sebasticook. So Sowadabscook at the sloping ledge, which is in Hamden. If you're coming up the Penobscot River, you come to the sloping ledge and you climb up about 4 miles. It's kind of waterfall-y for 4 miles, but then it just meanders through the landscape just in this boggy, beaver-strewn landscape. If you take 95, you're going over it 3 times right after you pass Dysarts. You go over that stream, same stream 3 times. It's just boom, boom, boom. And then you get to Etna Pond, and then you portage. You're that squirrel that jumps from one branch to another. You're jumping from Etna Pond, which is the highest pond here in this little piece of the Penobscot, to Pleasant Lake, which is the highest lake, right, on this piece of the Sebasticook River, and you can take that all the way down to Fort Halifax and on the Kennebec. So Sawadampscook to Sebastopol. That's a major canoe route. And friends of mine did it a couple of years ago, the whole thing, on their way to paddling 1,800 miles in one summer. Talked about the daylight Mitchells and the bear Mitchells. There's a story in our community about this, and it takes place on a portage. There was a little boy who gets lost on a portage. He must have been 2 or 3 when he turned up missing. Family couldn't find him. You know, it's kind of chaotic sometimes. Dads run off with the canoes down the portage trail. Mom's getting things together. Child runs after dad but can't seem to catch him. And mom thinks he's okay, but he turns up missing. And they search for him. And weeks go by and they still search for him. Winter comes and they abandon the search and they think he's all but gone. But years later, it was 4 or 5 years later, someone finds him. He's alive, he's well, and he's with bears. He was raised by a sow bear. She had cubs. She found this probably crying boy in the forest and raised. This is a story like grew up with. And then he came to like adore bears and then starts a whole other line of the family called the Bear Mitchells. That's where they come from. That's the origin story of the Bear family. Well, I spend a lot of time in Philadelphia, and I was going through Frank Siebert's notebooks. So our linguist who worked here in the 1970s, he was a retired pathologist. He came to our community, wrote a bunch of grants to study our language, interviewed a bunch of speakers in the community, and created a writing system and a dictionary. And he had dozens of these notebooks that he just wrote down stuff in, whether it was language related or other. And on one page, I've gone there, I've taken pictures of every page of every notebook. So I have these PDFs so I can look through them at my leisure. One day I flipped the page and there it is. There's this family chart that has Joe Polis, Thoreau's guide on it, and Joe Polis's father, and then I think his father after that. And then Joe Polis's brothers and who they were related to. And I was like, oh, I'm related to Joe Polis, because I could see down below, because I'm related to that person. Then I'm reading The Maine Woods for the umpteenth millionth time. I'm considered a Thoreau scholar today because I've read it so many times. I'm in the Ken Burns documentary about Thoreau, which just came out, three-part. It's on PBS. But I remembered Thoreau was with Joe Polis on Caucagomic Lake. Joe had a camp up there, which is above Chesuncook. And on a tree, Thoreau says there was a little piece of wood affixed to a tree, and it said, "We alone, Joseph Polis, start for Old Town right away. July 15th, 1855. So he's telling anybody who stops by to see him that he is in fact not there. He's not off hunting locally. He's actually gone to Old Town. He's taken the East Branch and he's gone to Old Town right away from that date that he wrote. And then when Thoreau was there, they cross out the date and put the date on it that Thoreau was there. But Thoreau remarks that at the top of this was an image of a bear paddling a canoe. And I was like, oh my God, that's because his grandfather was the boy. And it's written on that piece of paper. It says that was the boy who got lost on the portage and was raised by bears. He wrote it in there, Frank Siebert. whether that's completely true or not, but it ties Polis to the bear family, and that makes this image that much more poignant. That's on that piece of Bassagassawakeg. That's a river in Belfast, Maine. It means a place where we spear sturgeon by torchlight. The hunks and the cooks, these are endings. My wife says, I told my wife there's a joke here, and she's like, no, there's not a joke here at all, which is now become the joke, that there's not a joke. But these are canoeability terms. Hunk, like Nassauda hunk, means the stream that flows between the mountains, and it's very rocky and you can't canoe it. And the cooks, we just learned, Sawadaps cooks and the Sebasta cooks are very canoeable. In fact, encouraged to be canoed. The way we name things, we cluster them on the river, and it's from an upriver perspective again. And this is a set of falls in Bangor, and a stream in Bangor, and a wetlands in Bangor. And the wetlands I'm talking about are these ones up in here. Okay? And it's called the Pemjadjawik Wetlands, and the Pemjadjawik Falls, and Pemjadjawik Stream. They're all named the same thing, and they're Pemjadjawik. And usually, the first thing you come to from an upriver perspective, it's usually a description of that. And in this case, that holds tight. Because Pemjadjawik, Bangor is tidal. Even that far upriver, it still has the tide. In fact, it isn't until you get to this elbow in the corner, and there's a rock around this corner called Sobscook. That's the official head of tide. Bangor, because of Pemjadjawik Falls, is head of navigation. It's a distinction. Still tidal, though. Ships of any class could, till he put the 395 bridge in, could get to Bangor. Pemjadjawik is the falls that are there, and because it's tidal, at high tide, you can be out in the river in Bangor and not see a thing. It's all flat. It's all flat. But as the tide goes out, then these falls show up. That whole idea is Pemjadjawik. That's what it means. It comes into existence intermittently. Wow. Bangor needed a super Walmart. The one they had wasn't super enough, so they bought land to put the super Walmart in. Cheapest land around is usually wetlands. They're going to put down some gravel, and they're going to put a base down so they can put their exact same store that they put in a million other exact same places across the country. And I get this phone call all the time. People who, they want to save the wetland from the Walmart, and they're like, oh, it's the what does Pemjadjawik mean? So they call my office expecting me to say, oh, it means that place that should never have a Walmart. That's what they want it to mean. And when I tell them what it means, they start arguing with me. I'm like, no, it's a description of the falls. It's just the way that we did things. And Pemjadjawik Stream, it's still the stream that's near the falls that come into existence intermittently. And then the wetlands are the same thing. It's the same word. But boy, they didn't want to hear that. They want some magic cultural bullet that's going to stop the construction. They're well-meaning, but every place was sacred. But this happens, this whole idea where whatever's first takes precedence. This is Pockwawkamis, pond, stream, dead water, and falls. Same thing. Pockwawkamis, the most prominent thing here is the falls. It's the last of the falls, if you've ever gone whitewater rafting, that you go down over. And it's immense, over big boulders. And if you're standing down below, you have the best view of Katahdin opposite of falls. You can see up the falls, and then you see Katahdin. Pockwawkamis means seasonally shallow pond. It's all named for the pond. Not the dead water, not the stream, not the falls, the pond. All of it. Nesawatahunk, a huge set of falls on the Penobscot. Famous story of how Big Sabat ran, the first person to run those falls in a bateau, in Fanny Hardy Ekstrom's book, Penobscot Men. First chapter, look in boats. It's great. Story of this big Indian guy, big Sabatis Mitchell, who ran those falls for the first time and survived. They almost capsized the boat, and the boat was almost filled with water, and they hurried up and bailed it out. So everybody come running around the corner to see them in a almost completely dry boat. So the guys did it. And then the crazy fools put their boats back up on their shoulders and went up over the carry because they weren't going to be outdone. And one guy died, and they all swamped their boats. But that's the nature of Fanny's stories. But this falls, because the stream comes first, that means the stream is the stream that flows between the mountains. And it's, if you've ever been into Baxter State Park and hiked into like Niagara Falls, there's like falls you can get right in the stream and slide down the rocks. That's what's going on. That's the Nesawatahunk Stream. It's not canoeable. And it's certainly not a description of those immense horseshoe-style falls in the Penobscot River. I'm going to close with Glooscap and the Moose. This is a story in our culture. Glooscap was a teacher. He taught us how to live on this land. And one day he was going to teach us how to hunt moose. And so we gathered a party together to go hunt. And they went through the woods and they came upon a huge lake. And up the shore of the lake, they see a cow moose and her calf come down to the water to get a drink. And so Glooscap goes down and he picks up a stone from the ground and he affixes it to a stick, not just that stick into a bow. And he shoots that cow moose dead. Now, when the party went to go receive the gifts from the cow moose and gut her belly, they found that one, she was immense, big, and two, that she had turned to stone. They weren't getting any meat from her. Turned to stone completely. In fact, she became a mountain of stone that we know of today as Mount Kineo. Now, sounds pretty fantastic, almost Medusa-like, right? That she turns to stone, but she doesn't turn into just any stone. She turned into that stone that Glooscap picked up off the ground and affixed to a stick. Kineo is one of the largest repositories for hundreds of miles for stone that's perfect for making arrowheads. That's what the story's telling us. Now the calf moose is still alive. Kind of freaked out a little bit that his mom just turned to stone. And knocked over the kettle that Glooscap had ready in to cook the moose in, which becomes what we know of today as Little Spencer Mountain, but we used to call that Kettle Mountain, shaped like a kettle upside down. You guys know that word Cocajo? You would be like amazed at how close that word is to our word for kettle in our language. Cocajo has to do with that Little Spencer Mountain in our language, that town on the Roach Lakes. Then Glooscap takes off his backpack, his pack basket, and he throws it, and that, according to the legend, becomes Big Spencer Mountain. Now, I've always wondered if Big Spencer Mountain had a bunch of ash on it, like trees, because that's where we make pack baskets from. And so it makes sense to me, but I've never been able to definitively find that. And then the moose is like gone. Took it off across the landscape towards Penobscot Bay. It's wintertime. Glooscap has got his snowshoes on. He's got his dog in tow, and he sets off after the calf moose. And when he gets to the bay, the moose has already swam across the bay. And so Glooscap makes himself so big that he jumps over the dark forested land, and he lands on a place called Dice Head, which is in Castine. And they say he landed with such force with those snowshoes on his feet that those snowshoes made marks in the rocks. And it was from this vantage point that he gets the upper hand on the calf moose, and he shoots the calf moose dead, whose rump becomes Cape Rosier, a prominent hill in the area. Goes over and he guts the animal, throws the liver, which lands over in Eggemoggin Reach, which is called Thrum Cap Rock today. And then, as is traditional, he throws the entrails to his dog. His dog had swam part of the way onto Islesboro Island, and these entrails landed on the shores of Islesboro. You never fed the dog hand to mouth, and you never fed him the sweet meat of the kill because he wouldn't be able to track anymore. So you fed him the intestines. You threw him the bowels. And those land here on Islesboro. I've been to Dice Head. I took this picture. And there it is. There's gray granite with these crisscrossing lines of quartz. Now, I've taken main geology. I know how this was formed. I get it. I know what this is. From a scientific, I can tell you how this was formed. And people say, well, what do you believe? And I said, well, it doesn't matter what I believe, because when I went past that lighthouse, down those steps to that shore, and I saw these rocks, I knew that was the place they were talking about. And that's all you need to know, if that was the place they were talking about. It's a marker on the landscape. And it's more prominent when you're in a boat looking at it. You can see these web markings on, it was like someone threw a net over the rocks, especially in the rain. Really shows up. Now in Islesboro, where the moose entrails are, that's another quartz rock, but a big bundle of it. And it has these little tendrils that go into the water. You can see like they were, these. And we saw this. I was with my friend Bill Haviland. 12 miles away on an overcast day, we could see a white dot on an island way over there. 12 miles away, we could see a white dot. And we headed right for it. It was that rock. The port. The liver, Thrum Cap Ledge, reddish brown colored rock in a bay full of gray granite. Totally different. And when you're different, you're identifiable. People know where this is. These are those places, these stars. All right. When you start to look at these as travel markers, this is the entrails we could see. We pulled out of here. We could see it all the way across the bay. And that's a couple, probably 30 yards away from a portage across the narrowest part of the island. So when you're paddling, you probably don't even know this is an island. I mean, it's probably just all this, where the liver is. This shows you where this portage route is, which is the Blind Cove. The Blind Cove is a cove that goes in and quickly turns, so you can't even tell that it goes anywhere. It just looks like trees. But from this liver, you can tell, you can see that it's an inlet, and you would take that. This is the rump, and that's the snowshoes. But all of this is the way we would navigate in this area. And we find that even down this way, it was better to not be in the choppy seas, that you're much better off doing this thing where you were portaging a couple of different streams that went inland from the sea. We see it with Maguntacook and Duck Trap. You take Duck Trap to the top, Duck Trap River, portage one little couple half mile, into McGuntacook Lake, or it gets one pond from McGuntacook Lake, but then you come right down into Camden, and you've skipped a part of the ocean. It might have taken you longer, but it was safer. I'm going to close with this. This is the Penobscot River. That little island at the top is Verona, the two channels going around it. That top red arrow is a place called Fort Point. It's near Stockton Springs, and Searsport is in that general area. And the second arrow down below, the red arrow, is Castine's Neck. If you've ever been to Castine, Castine's essentially an island. It's got this little narrow neck that's holding on. And it's such an island, and it's so isolated, that it is the #1 town in the state of Maine that has more surviving elms than any other town. And in fact, that's part of their marketing, is come see the elms. Yeah, they're huge. They're beautiful, stately trees. Dutch elm disease didn't get out there because it was protected. I mean, it's got this neck. Castine is this island, essentially. It's just connected by this neck. But these two places, this was grassy place where we would have to wait. That's what it meant in Penobscot. This was gathering place where we had to wait. What are we waiting for? In the case of the one at the top, we're waiting for the tide to be going out, because the current of the river is coming like that, right? And if the tide is going in, there's going to be a lot of confused water when the tide is going in. It's going to be fighting. That's going to be happening, and it's not going to be good for you in your little eggshell of a craft, little birch bark canoe. So you would sit here, grassy place where you'd have to wait, waiting for this type of situation where you can ride the ingoing tide and have half a chance to, and this is all about wind, and it's all about the optimal conditions. Same thing there. And we found a place on North Haven that did the same thing. How do you get from North Haven to Islesboro? You have to, there's a waiting place. I'm done. Are there any questions? So where are we at right now? We're in Dover Foxcroft, right? But where are we at? From a water standpoint. We're on the Piscataqua River, right? Yeah. Above where the Pleasant River breaks off and the Sabois runs off, right? What's the highest place you can go in the Piscataqua, you know? Shirley Bog? Okay. That's interesting. I've never looked. Because I'm always going up through Sebec Lake, and then getting into Wilson Stream. Yeah, and then because that's going to take you to Moosehead Lake. That's a famous portage going that way. I'm always looking for the places that my ancestors went. And this was one of the most grueling, because Wilson Stream is just strewn with waterfalls. And it's like slate country, and it was hard travel. But if you had to. And then there was another one where at Penobscot you could go up over into the 3rd Depscanique Lake, into 4th Depscanique Lake, and then into Namacanta. Namacanta Stream is right there, but it's not canoeable. So you'd like go around it. But once there, then you can go into Pollywog and then go down to Penobscot Pond, which is the last pond before you run out of watershed. And then you portage into the Roaches. And you take the Roaches into Moosehead Lake that way, like through Cocadjo. Get in there. But the easiest way is Northeast Cary, from Moosehead Lake to what's called Penobscot Farm on the Penobscot, 2 miles straight through the woods. Boom, connecting both the watersheds. Dig your maps out. Take a look at the place.